There's something really rewarding knowing that you didn't achieve this thing that you've created because of some special talent. Rather, you achieved it from your own willpower, from your own diligence, from your own hard work. I think that is way more special. I can give you every advice, give you every trick, tell you to listen to this, I could tell you to eat this or eat that, but that would all be BS. At its simplest form, every advice that I'm sharing here by saying that if you keep your hand moving and you keep your pencil moving and you keep your keyboard moving and you're trying to output it in some sort of a physical manifestation of what you have in your head, as simple as it sounds, that's all you actually need to do. Hey, happy Monday. Welcome back. I hope you had a good weekend. I know I left you guys hanging last week. By the way, before we get started, the lighting is going to change every now and then because the clouds keep rolling by. So if the exposure changes and I go from light to dark, I'm sorry. So the reason why I saved this topic for today, Monday, rather than getting into it last week, is that when it comes to developing a rhythm or whatever creative field that you're in, this coveted flow state is, everybody wants to be in it. The creative ideas, the momentum, everything feels like it's coming out of you that sounds terrible. And of course, as a creative, this is a state that you want to be in. It's equivalent to sailing across the ocean with the winds behind your back, or running a marathon and the breeze is just, I don't know anything about marathons. The reason why entering this flow state and developing a rhythm is so important is that I truly believe that if you're able to control it and bottle it and be in that zone during the times that you need, ideally during the work hours, rather than, inspiration striking you in the middle of the night and then you gotta stop everything you're doing and work. When I was younger and I had all the time in the world to dedicate to just working, it's not how you want to work. This approach is more of a lunch pail, 9 to 5 type of approach when it comes to developing a rhythm and getting into a flow state creatively, especially within the parameters of work hours. Otherwise, it's called being a professional. So if you watched my most recent video last week, you'll know that I ended the week by roughing in these pages. As you can see, they're very rough, to the point where it barely looks like a professional drew this, right? I was doing that to give my Monday self a leg up, and in terms of not facing a blank page, because like I said, there's nothing scarier than looking at a blank canvas. The possibilities can be quite overwhelming. So today, I'm taking those chicken scratch that I've created, and I'm beginning to fill in the blanks, right? I even set up the parameters of the border, so that way I kind of already have an idea of what the rules are. It's like entering a game. When you're aware of what the rules are of a particular game that you're playing, your brain adjusts much easier in terms of figuring out how to play to win. And it's kind of the same approach that I'm taking with my art. For others, it might feel restricting to draw the borders before you've drawn the images inside. But when I laid out the page, I had already a very distinct idea of how the rhythm of the story was going to go, especially, looking at my layouts, which really comes in handy with giving me the roadmap of where things are going to go, right? So that's why right now, thanks to my Friday self who roughed these things in, I'm not starting completely blank. I can start from a place of not really a head start. I hesitate to say that, but it's certainly a place where somebody has already done the demolition on the house, and I can kind of just begin to make measurements and figure out where things are going to go from a design perspective, from a design point of view, I guess. Facing a blank page like this is a very scary thing to face, but it's why, when I start a page, I'm working very quickly and I'm just making marks on a page. Quite a lot of it gets erased, but at least I'm not staring at something blank. One of the things that painters often do is they'll take a blank canvas and they'll just start laying down a base color. That base color could change at some point once they start painting it, but the base color gives them something to build from. It gives this idea of parameters and possibilities, right? It's kind of like staring at a blank, an empty lot, a field filled with possibilities, but at the same time, that can be quite overwhelming, right? But when you're looking at a field, perhaps with the ground foundation laid down, you kind of begin to understand the parameters in which you're able to build your house. It's the same thing with art, or at least for me, I feel like it's a similar frame of thought that I try to, I guess, inhabit in my mind, that these drawings are not final. These drawings are not meant to be seen. In fact, you're seeing them right now because I've invited you into my process, and so that I can share them with you. But typically, this is the underbelly of creating a comic book, right? It's like seeing the green screen of a movie before you're meant to see it. It looks dirty, it looks messy, it looks uninspiring, really. And but these rough markings, it's really just the beginning of an idea, right? And at this point, since I'm coming in cold from the weekend, I don't have any creative momentum whatsoever. The idea of filling in a page with all these marks and kind of loosening your body up and limbering up, this is how I'm able to slowly get into the mindset that, hey, I am now working. I need to tap into whatever creative mind that I have that is like in the recesses of my brain. I'm trying to wake that up. And by staying really loose, not having any particular expectations of what this art will look like, really frees me from that what's the term for it? It's the being paralyzed from decisions, right? Or being paralyzed from trying to attempt perfection. Everything that I'm doing right now is meant to just, I guess, develop a sense of movement, not in the art, but in myself, in my body and in my mind. I'm just trying to get it to a point where there's a certain elasticity to my brain that isn't so rigidly set, and in knowing that I'm not in the zone, but rather I'm trying to just settle in that alarm clock. It's a beeping that is slowly getting louder and louder in order to wake up whatever creative juices that is trapped inside of me that I am trying to wake up. Penciling is a lot like sculpting. You're kind of just making marks on a page, trying to uncover an image out of it. I find that this process really helps with the elasticity of my brain to be much more accepting of what I'm physically or mentally capable of doing, right? Keeping things this loose, it makes it feel like Like, there are so many possibilities. I could very well succeed in this image. It could be the best face that I've drawn, or it could be the worst face that I've drawn. Every line that I'm making is a suggestion. None of these lines are probably ever going to be precisely translated once I start inking. And I find that the indications and the hint of what it could be, it is pretty exciting, and it does fill you with optimism of possibilities of what it could be. I won't know until the process continues to move along and progress to the next stage. Until then, I'm really living in this la la land. And I think that's one of the things that helped me get into the flow state, is tapping into those unfulfilled expectations. And when I say unfulfilled, those are expectations that you and I both know. They're coming. As we progress on this page, the expectations of what the finished product of this will be fulfilled, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. I feel like every artist here has started a piece with such high hopes and optimism of what they think it will end up being, and sometimes when you accomplish it, you feel this euphoria, as if you've just accomplished the greatest thing in the world. And then other times when it falls short of your expectations, it can feel quite demoralizing. But that's why I feel this particular stage it's really a magical moment, because it's essentially a promise. It's you've created a drawing that is a promise to yourself of what it could be, right? And I find that is something that helps motivate me and gets me moving towards a flow state. So sometimes I enter that flow state quite quickly, and other times it takes a little bit longer. Right now, admittedly, I'm not quite in the flow state yet. I'm thinking of what the possibilities of what this image would be like once I ink it. But at the current moment, I'm still sculpting. I'm still hammering and chiseling at a rock that I am trying to uncover an image out of, and it's not quite there yet for me, but I know it will get there as long as I keep hammering and chiseling. It's easy to fool your brain, like, taking into account something that we often experience, but in a negative way, which is, I'm just gonna have one bag of chip. I'm gonna have just one bag of chip. What I'm trying to say is, I'm gonna have just a single chip, right? We all know that doesn't happen. You're gonna grab a second potato chip. You're gonna grab a third, a fourth, a fifth, and then at some point, before you know, you've eaten an entire bag. And I kind of feel that creativity runs a similar course of action. So sometimes when I'm sitting down, and I find this is something that gets me into trouble often when it comes to remembering to go home, is that sometimes I'll be like, what, I'm just gonna do this one little thing, just this one thing, and then before I know it, I've been fiddling with that one thing for like an hour, when I really was intending to just pick at something for 10 to 15 minutes. That's the power of just starting. I think often the greatest hurdle that you really need to overcome is your inaction. The will and fortitude to just start is something that it's not reserved for people who are at a higher skill level. It's something that anybody can really do. Again, if you find yourself in moments lacking inspiration, don't think of it as a wave you're trying to catch. It's because trust me, when you do have that wave of inspiration combined with your tenacity and willpower to keep working, then man, that's a really powerful moment. Inspiration doesn't happen often, but you can trigger it. You can create the conditions in which something like that could happen. And I believe that starting with something small, starting with something very little. At the beginning of today, I wasn't really in the rhythm. I'm not sure if I am in the rhythm now. I just know that at the current moment, things are flowing a little bit easier. It's things that I'm drawing feel a little less difficult. And a lot of it is I believe I'm setting up the appropriate conditions in order for the flow state to happen. And what I will do to begin, if you noticed, I started on the bigger elements of the page, the faces, things that have a little bit more room for me to maneuver. Parts of the page that are small like this, I find I need to be operating at a higher level of concentration because it is so noodly and small. I find that once I'm able to work on these panels in a quicker fashion where it feels like it's not difficult, I'll know that the conditions of potentially entering the flow state is either I'm in it or it's about to begin. Simply put, start on something easy. Look at the page, assess your layout, figure out where the easiest lift would be. Maybe it's drawing a tree. Maybe it's drawing something that doesn't have an anatomical structure that requires your brain power to be accessed. Maybe it's something that you've drawn a million times. Like in this case, I started with the faces. I believe that illustrating faces is one of my stronger skill sets. So for me, it was a no-brainer to begin my day to look for the easiest part of the page. Your mileage may vary depending on the type of person you are with regards to your ability to concentrate. Whether you're somebody who is distracted very easily, and this advice then may be absolutely the wrong thing for you to try. But for me, it works. Sometimes one of the more challenging parts of trying to initiate a state of flow is being too much in your own head. And sometimes you got to get out of your own head in order to have a bit of a natural fluidity to the work that you're doing. And one of the things that I often do, this is something that is particularly a lot easier to achieve when you're drawing. I'll listen to an audiobook or a podcast or some music, or it really changes depending on what I'm in the mood for that day. It doesn't matter what you're really listening to or even watching. It's really about getting out of your own head. The goal is trying to put yourself in a natural, neutral space, I guess. So obviously when you're listening to those things, new thoughts are being infused into your mind, especially when you're listening to an audiobook or a podcast. And for me personally, I think that's okay, because sometimes I'll listen to something and it will be inspiring and it may motivate me to work a little bit harder. But mostly my goal when I'm consuming some form of media as I'm working is to tap into a natural state of drawing where I'm not really thinking. I'm trying to work in a way that I'm trusting my own natural instinct. And sometimes when I'm thinking too much, I have a tendency to overthink what I'm doing, and that leads to a state of mind that is just constantly second guessing itself. And it's hard to develop any sort of artistic momentum when the entire time that you're trying to achieve that momentum, you're just stopping it by sabotaging it subconsciously, because you're trying to achieve some sort of perfection with your art, or some sort of a goal that you have that you're just unable to meet, and that's why you're unable to execute. But sometimes just try to get out of your own way. Fun fact, one of my fondest memories of deadlining when I was younger is that I would turn on the TV, and I would put in the Lord of the Rings DVD, and I would literally just watch the entire movie as I'm drawing, and I would have that playing in the background. To some people, it may be distracting. They may stop to look, but most of the time, these are movies that I've seen multiple times. I never put on anything that I've never seen before, because you will get distracted. The idea is that to me, it felt like it was familiar company. As nerdy as it sounds, I loved hanging out in the Shire and listening to their adventures and stuff. And it also served as a marker for progress. I would look at where I'm at with regards to my page, and where the movie is at with regards to its runtime. And that movie is long enough that at that particular point in time, I really subscribed to the fact that if I wasn't close to finished penciling a page by the time the movie is over, I was moving too slow. Obviously, this is something that isn't as easily achievable when you're writing. But what I tend to do for that is I would either prefer complete silence, or I would listen to a movie score, any type of music that really doesn't have any lyrics and it's more instrumental, whatever floats your boat. But the goal is to have the music that you're listening to not be overpowering, and it's just sort of there in the background, and it's more atmospheric than something that you're actively listening to and having it engage your mind in a way that's too distracting. Again, this is advice that really will differ from person to person. If you tuned in because you were looking for a magic bullet that would solve all of your creative problems, I suppose, I'm sorry. But I think the things that I'm sharing are very practical and doable advice. I'm not sharing with you something that you can't implement at any skill level. The act of doing and drawing and creating, or whatever is your creative endeavor, it really ultimately comes down to diligence and willpower. What I'm attempting to share are just things that I have personally implemented and tried myself. I can't really share with you knowledge over something I have never actually done. And from my experience of having done this for a couple decades, I find more often than not, whenever I'm feeling unmotivated to work, I find that the act of just doing, just starting, really triggers something inside of you that can get you to that state, this flow state that everybody is trying to achieve. When you set out to create something, you don't really go into it thinking that you're trying to achieve some sort of greatness, or you can't think that you're special. We all want to think that we're special, but I think there's something more magical and special about finding something that's buried deep inside of you that you didn't think you have or are capable of, and then you unearth it. You can't, by not believing this idea of like, oh, you're so talented, anything that you do, I'm sure will be cool. It doesn't feel that way when you're going through this stage of lack of flow or inspiration. It's not helpful. You really have to take a workman-like approach to your craft. You really got to bring your lunch pail and approach it that way. Approach it like work that you hopefully enjoy and derive a sense of emotional accomplishment from. And I think there's something to be said about achieving specialness. I don't know the word, but there's something really rewarding knowing that you didn't achieve this thing that you've created because of some special ability that you have. Rather, you achieved it from your own willpower, from your own diligence, from your own hard work. I think that is way more special than you inherently having the ability to draw or create. Rather, what is special is your ability to, go from this state of being where you feel like you can't create because the conditions aren't there, because more often than not, they won't be there. But, this ability that you've learned to hone and tap into will pay you in dividends when you know that this accomplishment that you have isn't because of some inherent talent that you were gifted. Rather, it was something that you fought hard to and strived for throughout your day in order to accomplish. That sense of pride that you're going to have over achieving that will dwarf any accolades that you may have for being talented. Because talent, it feels like somebody is saying that you just have it and you plopped it on paper. You didn't work hard to carve it out of a hard rock to bring it to a physical manifestation that the readers and the audience can hopefully enjoy. It robs you of your hard work. So really what it comes down to when you want to achieve a certain state of flow, you just have to remember that, as cheesy as it sounds, it's inside of you, but you have to understand how to bring it out of you. And the only way to really do that is to just pick up a pencil, grab your keyboard, grab your mouse, and simply just get to work. Hey, thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and want to show support for Peter and I's work, please consider pre-ordering the Rocketfellers Volume 1, which will be available at your local retailers on September 10th, but you can pre-order it now. I'm going to pop the information down below. Thanks for watching.